My daughter looked me in the eye across my own kitchen table and told me that at 72 years old, I ought to have some dignity, that I was making a fool of myself, and that the kind, decent man who had asked me to marry him was obviously only after my house. She said it the way you'd correct a child who'd embarrassed you in public. You're somebody's grandmother. Mother, people are talking. He's after the house and the money. Any fool can see it. And frankly, you're humiliating this whole family. My son sat beside her and studied his coffee and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. And I sat there in the kitchen where I'd raised the two of them, 72 years old, being told by my own children that my heart had no business still working, that wanting to be loved again at my age was something shameful I should be talked out of. What my children did not know, as they sat at my table explaining to me how foolish and embarrassing my happiness was that I had already been to see a lawyer. A week before I'd breathed a word to either of them about Gus. I had quietly done one thing, the one thing that was going to call their bluff so completely that there'd be nothing left for them to hide behind. By the time it was done, I would know exactly what my children were really made of. And so would they. And there are some things you cannot unknow about the people you raised. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Peggy. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a small town on the coast of Maine, the kind of place where the fog comes in off the water and sits in the spruce trees, and everybody knows everybody, and the same families have been arguing across the same fences for 200 years. I carried the mail here for 31 years, a rural route, 400 boxes, up every dirt road and down every lane in this town, in the snow and the mud season and the black flies of June, 6 days a week for 31 years. You learn a town carrying its mail. You learn it better than the preacher does, better than the doctor. You learn who's getting the overdue notices and who's getting the love letters, who's lonely by the way they come out to the box just to talk, who's good and who's putting on. 31 years of reading people from behind the wheel of a mail truck. I want you to hold on to that, because it matters to what came later. I am not a woman who is easily fooled. That was the very thing my children decided to forget. There is one quiet thing I did. The week before I told my children about Gus, that I'll come back to, because it turned out to be the truest test I ever gave the two of them, though I didn't know it when I did it. But you have to understand the whole of it first, the loneliness and the love, and what my children chose. So let me start where the second half of my life started, which is with the end of the first half. My husband was named Chet. We were married 44 years. He drove a log truck when we were young, and then he ran the little hardware store on Main Street for 30 years. And he was a good man, steady and kind, and not given to many words. The kind of man who showed his love by keeping your car running and your woodpile full, rather than by saying it. We had a good, plain life. We raised 2 children in this house, Sharon and Kevin, and we were happy in the unremarkable way that's actually the rarest happiness there is. Chet got sick the winter he turned 70, a cancer, and it took him in 7 months from the day the doctor said the word. And I nursed him through every single day of it, right here in this house. And I held his hand at the very end, while the snow came down outside the window he'd put in himself. And then I was a widow at 64. And I found out what that word actually means, which is nothing at all like what you think it means before it comes for you. It doesn't mean sad. Sad would be easy. Sad you can set down sometimes. It means alone in a way that has no bottom to it. It means cooking for one and forgetting how, standing in the kitchen at 5 o'clock with no idea why. Because for 44 years, 5 o'clock meant Chet coming through the door. It means setting one place at the table and staring at it. It means the long Sunday afternoons that don't end. It means reaching over in the night to a cold half of the bed you can't make yourself stop reaching to. And it means, worst of all, nobody to tell when something funny happens. That's the one that surprised me. You'd think it would be the big things you'd miss, the holidays, the anniversaries, but it's the small ones. It's seeing something funny at the post office and turning to tell him, and there's nobody there. And there's nobody there at supper either. And there won't be anybody there to tell it to ever again. A joke with nobody to tell it to is about the loneliest thing this world has got. I did that for 8 years. 8 years. And I want to stop here a moment, because I've been talking a while, and it would do me good to know who's keeping me company tonight. Wherever you are, whatever town, leave it down below where I can see it. A woman who spent 8 years setting one place at the table learns not to take a little company for granted, not even from voices she'll never see. There now. Where was I? 8 years a widow. My children were good to me, in the way grown children are good to a widowed mother, which is to say, from a distance and on a schedule. Sharon, my daughter, called every Sunday at 4 and managed my life over the telephone. What I should eat, which doctor I should see, whether I ought to still be driving. Kevin, my son, came by to look at the furnace twice a year and stayed for 1 cup of coffee. I had the grandchildren, and they were my joy, especially Sharon's girl, Lily, who's 19 now and has my own mother's laugh coming right out of her. But my children had their own lives, as they should, and at the end of every visit, they drove home to them. And I stayed here, in the quiet. The grandmother in the photographs, the woman you call on Sundays at 4. I was grateful for them, and I never once let them see how the silence was wearing me down to nothing. Because that's the bargain we make, we widowed mothers. We agree to be fine. We agree never to be a burden. We agree to need nothing at all, so that our children can go on loving us without it costing them anything. I kept my end of that bargain for 8 years. I just didn't understand, until I tried to set it down, that they expected me to keep it forever. And then, 2 years ago, at a church supper of all the unlikely places, I met Gus. Gus builds boats. Built them, I should say. Wooden ones, the old way, with steam and patience, before his hands got too stiff with the arthritis to do it anymore. He'd lost his wife, Eleanor, 4 years before, the same long, ugly way I lost Chet, and he'd nursed her through every day of it, the same as I had. So we knew the same country, he and I, without having to draw each other a map. We got to talking over the baked beans about nothing at all, about the fog and the fish prices and a dog he'd had, and he made me laugh. An actual laugh. The kind that comes up out of somewhere you'd forgotten you had. The kind I had not laughed since before Chet got sick. And I drove home that night and caught myself smiling at the dark road for no reason on this earth, and I had to pull over, because I'd forgotten a person could do that, smile at nothing, and it frightened me a little how good it felt. We started slow. Lord, we started slow. 2 old creatures who'd both been burned by how much loving somebody can cost you when you lose them. Coffee, first, at the diner, in daylight, like 2 people who had nothing to hide, because we didn't. Then, a Sunday drive up the coast to see the leaves turn. Then he came by and fixed the porch step that had wobbled since Chet passed. fixed it before I'd even thought to mention it was broken, and wouldn't take $1. Looked almost insulted that I'd reached for my purse. And somewhere in all that slowness, 2 old widowed people who'd each made a careful peace with the quiet found out the quiet wasn't the only thing left to us after all. Found out there was a whole second half still waiting, if we had the nerve to want it. I want to tell you about Gus, plainly, because my children later painted him as a swindler, and I owe the truth to a good man. Gus never once, in 2 years, asked me for anything. Not money, not favors, not so much as a tank of gas. He has his own little house, paid off free and clear since before I knew him, and his Navy pension. Modest, but his. And he would sooner cut off his own stiff hand than take a nickel that wasn't his to take. When my gutter came down in a March storm, he was up the ladder in the sleet before I could even finish telling him about it. And when I went for my purse afterward, he looked so genuinely wounded that I never made that mistake again. He brought me vegetables from his garden in paper sacks, more than one old man could eat, just so he'd have a reason to come by. He brought me a birdhouse he'd built. And once, after I'd mentioned in passing that my favorite wooden spoon had finally cracked after 40 years, he showed up 2 weeks later with a new one he'd carved himself out of a piece of cherry, sanded smooth as glass, that fit my hand like it had grown there. A man does not carve a woman a spoon because he's after her house. After 31 years of reading every single soul on my route, the lonely ones and the liars and the good plain people, I knew exactly what I was looking at across that bean supper table and on that ladder in the sleet. I was looking at a good man, the rarest kind, the kind who shows up and shows up and shows up and asks for nothing back. I knew it the way I know the weather coming off the water, in my bones, without having to be told. And I want that down on the record before I tell you what my own 2 children decided, from 300 miles away, that he was. Because when I finally, nervously, feeling for all the world like a teenage girl again, told my children that I'd met someone, and that he was a good man, and that he'd asked me to marry him and I had said yes, the temperature in this house dropped 40 degrees in about 4 seconds flat. I'd practiced how I'd say it. I'd imagined, foolish woman that I was, that they might be glad, that they might be relieved their mother wouldn't be rattling alone around this house anymore, that they might even hug me. I had a little speech ready about how nobody could ever replace their father and how this was something different and new. I never got to give it. I saw it land on Sharon's face first, the way a storm shows on the water before it reaches you. And I knew before either of them said a single word that I was not going to be congratulated. I was going to be corrected. Sharon led the charge, the way she's led every charge since she was 4. First it was shock, then it was hurt, then it curdled fast into something uglier. How could I do this to their father's memory? What would people think? Wasn't I a little old to be playing the bride? And then, underneath all of it, the thing I came to understand was the real engine of the whole business. The money. What about the house, Mother? What about Dad's money? You've known this man 2 years. He's 74. He's got no real estate to speak of, and suddenly he wants to marry a woman with a paid-off house on the water? Use your head. He's after what you've got, what Dad worked his whole life for, what's supposed to come to us and the grandkids. What's supposed to come to us? There it was, on my own kitchen table, 8 years after their father died, and before I'd even set a wedding date. My happiness ran straight up against their inheritance, and the inheritance won without a contest. I have to be fair, even now, because the truth has more than one room, And I saw things in those weeks I've made myself remember. Sharon had been her father's girl, and when Chet died, something in her never set right. And I think me marrying again cracked that grief back open, made it real all over again that her daddy was gone and not coming back. And the world had the nerve to keep going anyway. I understood that. And Kevin? My Kevin? He wasn't cruel like his sister. He just couldn't stand against her. Never could. And he had his own money troubles I knew about and wasn't supposed to. And I think the thought of that inheritance had become a life raft in his mind that he wasn't ready to watch float off. They were not monsters. They were frightened and grieving and, yes, a little greedy, the way frightened people get. But understanding why a thing is happening does not mean you have to lie down and let it roll over you. I'd learned that much in 72 years. It got worse before it got better, the way these things do. The indignities came one on top of another, each one a little sharper than the last, and I need you to feel how they stacked, because that's how they wear a woman down to where she'll give up the best thing left in her life just to make the disapproval stop. Sharon stopped bringing the grandchildren by. The first Sunday it happened, I thought it was a scheduling thing. And the second Sunday, I knew it wasn't. And when I finally asked her straight out, she said she didn't think my house was a healthy environment for the children right now, with everything so unstable. Unstable. I wanted to laugh, and I wanted to weep. The most stable thing that had happened to me in 8 years was a man who fixed my porch and brought me garden tomatoes. And she called it unstable. What she meant, and we both knew it, was that the price of Gus was going to be my grandchildren. She didn't have to spell it out. I could have my new life, or I could have Lily and the little ones at my table. But I was not going to be allowed to have both. That is the cruelest card a grown child can lay down in front of a grandmother. And my Sharon laid it down without her hand so much as shaking. Then they went after Gus himself, Kevin announced, proud as a boy with a frog in his pocket, that he'd run a background check. And of course it turned up nothing. Nothing but a man who'd paid his taxes for 50 years and buried his wife and never had so much as a parking ticket. But Kevin said it like it was a disappointment, like he'd been cheated of the dirt he was sure he'd find. And then the two of them did the thing I will never quite get all the way over. They invited Gus to lunch, without me. To get to know him, they said. And instead they sat that gentleman down at a restaurant table and questioned him about his money and his Navy pension and what exactly his intentions were toward their mother's estate. And they told him, to his face, over the iced tea, that they knew his game and he wasn't going to get $1 of what was theirs. Gus told me about it that night, and he wasn't angry, that's the thing. He was just quiet and a little grey, and he said, "I think your kids love you, Peg. They're just going about it sideways. And that grace, that decency, after the way they'd treated him, was harder for me to sit with than any cruelty would have been." That was the season I stopped sleeping again, the way I hadn't since the months Chet was dying. I'd lie awake in the dark on my side of a bed that had been all my side for 8 years. And I'd do the arithmetic of it, over and over. 8 years alone. One good man. And the price of that man, set not by him, but by my own son and daughter, was my grandchildren, and my family, and my standing as a respectable widow who knew her place and kept it. And lying there in the dark, with not one living soul in that house to tell me different, I started to believe them. That's the part I most need you to hear, all of you listening tonight. Because if it could happen to a woman who read 400 mailboxes for 31 years and prided herself on not being fooled by anyone, then it can happen to anybody. To you. To someone you love. Alone in the dark, you start to believe the people who love you, even when what they're telling you is poison. I started to think, maybe Sharon was right. Maybe I was a silly, lonely old woman. Maybe wanting to be held again at 72 was a foolish, undignified thing that the people who loved me were right to be embarrassed by. Maybe my children's approval was worth more than my own last chance at joy. Maybe the proper thing, the dignified thing, was to be the grandmother in the photographs and answer the phone on Sundays at 4 and be grateful for what I had and stop reaching, at my age, for more than a woman my age had any earthly business reaching for. I lay in that dark for a lot of nights and let my own children talk me, long distance, right out of the best thing left in my life. And I'll be honest with you, because this is the truest part, and it is not the part where I'm brave. I almost called it off. I picked up the telephone one night to call Gus and tell him I couldn't go through with it, that my family had to come first, that I'd been a foolish old woman to think I could have this, that I was too old and it was too late, and the cost was simply more than I could pay. I had the phone in my hand and the number half dialed, and it was Gus himself who stopped me, though he was trying with all his heart to do the very opposite. Because before I could finish dialing, my own phone rang, and it was him. And that good man who had sat at a restaurant table and been called a swindler to his face by my own son, said to me, gentle as anything, "Peggy, I've been doing some thinking, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve. I never, ever want to be the thing that costs you your children and those grandbabies. They're your blood. I'm a fellow you met 2 years ago at a bean supper. So if me stepping back is what gives you your family back, then that's what I'll do. And I won't fuss about it, and I won't say a word against you, and I'll spend the rest of my days just plain grateful that I got to make you laugh again, even if it was only for a little while." And then he was quiet, and I could hear him breathing on the line, and I knew, the way 31 years of reading people lets you know a thing bone deep, that he meant every single word of it. He was offering to walk away with nothing and break his own heart to do it, so that I could keep mine whole. And that was the exact moment I came all the way back to myself, standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and tears running down into my collar, because I understood, finally, what I was looking at, and what I'd almost thrown away. A swindler does not do that. A man after your house and your money does not call you up to offer to disappear with nothing, just so you won't have to lose your grandchildren. Only love does that. Only love gives you up for your own good. My children had the whole thing exactly backwards, upside down and inside out. And in trying so hard to be noble and let me go, Gus had just shown me the truth of it so plainly that I could have fallen down. The man my children called a thief was the only soul in the entire business who wasn't trying to take one single thing from me. My children wanted my obedience, and my money kept in its proper place, and my whole life arranged neatly for their comfort and their inheritance. Gus only wanted me to be happy, even in a version of the future that didn't have him in it at all. And right there, with the phone in my hand, I knew with a clean and final certainty which of them was really my family. I told Gus to hush and to hold on, and that I had one thing to take care of first. And then I told them all to come to the house. But here is the thing I'd done. The quiet thing, the week before any of this started, that I told you I'd come back to. Before I ever said one word to my children about getting married, I had driven up to Bangor to see a lawyer, an estate lawyer, a sharp woman named Frances Doyle. Because I am not a foolish old woman, whatever my daughter decided, and 31 years of reading people had taught me that the cleanest way to find out what someone really wants is to give them the thing they say they want and watch what they do. So before I told them anything, I'd had Frances Doyle draw up 2 documents. The first was a prenuptial agreement, ironclad, that said Gus could never, under any circumstance, in life or in death or in divorce, receive $1 single of mine or 1 shingle of this house. Not a penny. The second was a trust that put the house and Chet's money and everything I had into a locked box that would pass, the day I died, entirely to my children and grandchildren. Exactly as they'd always assumed it would, and that Gus could never touch, no matter what. I had, in other words, completely and permanently solved the only problem my children claimed to have. Their inheritance was safe, untouchable. Gus would get nothing, ever. I had made certain of it before they'd ever raised the objection. So when they came to the house, all braced for the fight they thought was coming, I laid those 2 documents on the kitchen table in front of them, the same table where Sharon had told me to have some dignity. And I didn't say much. I just let them read. And I watched their faces. The way I'd watched faces at 400 mailboxes for 31 years. Because the face tells you the truth. The mouth is still deciding whether to say. Because the money was no longer the question, I had taken it entirely off the table. Every dollar of it. The house was theirs. Chet's savings were theirs. Gus was locked out of every cent for the rest of time, in writing, signed and witnessed and notarized in a lawyer's office in Bangor. If their objection had ever once truly been about a gold digger, about protecting their mother, about guarding their father's hard-earned legacy from a thief, then this was the moment it should have all fallen away. This was the moment for shoulders to drop, for somebody to say, "Well, all right then, Mum, if you're sure." This was the moment, if they'd been telling the truth, for relief. And for one held breath, standing in my own kitchen, I let myself hope for it. I am not ashamed to say I hoped, right up to the end, that I was wrong about my own children. I was not wrong. Sharon finished reading the papers. The papers that handed her free and clear everything she'd spent 2 months claiming to fight for. And she squared them up on the table with her fingertips. And her face never softened by 1 single degree. And she said, "This isn't about the money, Mother." And I said, very quietly, "I know it isn't, Sharon. I've known that a while now. I just needed you to be the one to say it out loud." Because there it was, finally, in the open, with the money gone and not one respectable thing left to hide behind. It had never been about protecting me from anything. It had never even, in the end, really been about their father. It was about control. It was about a daughter who had decided, somewhere in her own grief, that her mother's whole remaining job on this earth was to stay put, stay quiet, stay grateful, stay the grey woman in the photo frames who answered the phone on Sundays at 4, and never, ever, as long as she lived, want a single thing of her own again. The inheritance had only ever been the respectable mask over it. And the moment I reached up and pulled that mask off, what was underneath wasn't love at all. It was ownership. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted to keep me. I did not yell. I'd learned a long time ago, on 400 mailboxes, that the quiet word lands harder than the loud one. I said, I have signed away every dollar I have to you and your brother. You will lose nothing. Not a house, not a penny, not one thing of your father's. The only thing you stand to lose by my marrying Gus is the say you think you have over how I spend the last good years of my life. And that, children, was never yours to begin with. I have been somebody's daughter, and somebody's wife, and somebody's mother, and somebody's grandmother my whole life. For once, for whatever years I've got left, I am going to be Peggy, and you are all invited to the wedding, but you are not invited to stop it. Nobody had anything to say to that. There wasn't anything to say. The papers had said it all for me. I married Gus that fall, in the little white church where we'd met over the baked beans, on a bright, cold Maine morning with the maples gone red as a barn. It was small, and it was perfect. My friends came, the women I'd carried mail alongside for 31 years, the choir I've sung in, half the town I'd handed letters to up every dirt road in the county. Lily came, my Lily, 19 and braver than her whole family, who stood right up to her own mother to be there, and who cried through the whole thing and told me at the end that Grandpa Chet would have wanted me warm and not alone. And that undid me completely, right there in my good dress. Kevin came too, in the end. Sheepish, alone, no Sharon beside him. And he shook Gus's hand and held it a second too long. And he said, low, I'm sorry, Mum. And I saw that he meant it, and I have learned to take a beginning where it's offered. Sharon did not come. Her chair sat empty, and I felt it the whole morning. Because she is my girl, and I love her, and I would have given a great deal to have her there. But I have learned, late and hard, that you cannot set down your own one chance at happiness and stand on the curb forever, waiting on a child who has decided your job is to disappear quietly. The door stays open. It will always stay open on my end. But I am not going to live my life standing in it. I am going to live it in the warm house behind it. I'm 72 years old, and Gus and I have been married a little over a year now. And I'm here to tell you, the second spring is sweeter than anybody warns you, because you come to it knowing exactly what it costs and exactly what it's worth. We take our coffee on the porch in the mornings and watch the fog burn off the water. He builds me foolish, wonderful things. A new mailbox shaped like a little boat, a bench for the garden. I make him laugh, and he makes me laugh. Two old people who buried the loves of their youth and were handed, against every reasonable expectation, one more good love at the very end. And we are not about to waste a single morning of it being careful. Lily comes for supper most weeks and dotes on her grandpa Gus and is learning to whittle from him. Kevin comes around more all the time. Slow, but real. Healing. And I still set the table, the way I did all those lonely years. But I set it for 2 now, and many nights for 3 or 4. And I'll tell you the sweetest part. The part I waited 8 years for without knowing it. The house is not quiet anymore. After 8 years, the house is not quiet anymore. People think the cruelest betrayal comes from strangers, or from greed, or from a thief at your door. And there was greed in my story. I won't pretend there wasn't. But I've come to believe the cruelest thing is subtler and far more common than a thief. It's the people who love you deciding, somewhere along the way, that your love is supposed to flow one direction only, toward them, forever, and that your own heart's needs ended the day you became their mother. The cruelest thing is being told, by the people you die for, that you've gotten too old to deserve a life of your own. I almost believed it. I came within one phone call of believing it. So if you're out there tonight, widowed or alone, or just told one too many times that your happiness is an inconvenience to the people who are supposed to love you, let me tell you what 31 years of mailboxes and one good man and a hard season with my own children taught me. You do not stop being a whole person the day you become somebody's mother, or the day you turn 70, or the day you bury the love of your youth. Your right to love and to choose and to a life of your very own does not expire. You do not owe anybody your loneliness, not your children, not your grief, not the memory of a good man who, I promise you, would want you warm and not alone. Sign the papers if it gives them peace. Protect what's theirs. Be generous. Be kind. And then go live all the way to the end. Because the one who stays alive inside herself, who keeps reaching for joy when everyone tells her she's too old to deserve it, that woman has already won the only thing worth winning. If this story found you tonight, stay a while, and I'll have another for you soon. And tell me, down below, did you find love again when you'd stopped expecting it? Or are you still hoping you might? And where in this world are you keeping me company from tonight? I read every single one. Take care of yourself. And don't you dare let anybody tell you you're too old to be happy.